Hello, my dear. Good afternoon to all of you. Today, in my first video online class, I'm going to explain the summary of the relations Footprints Without Feet written by A.G. Wells from your supplementary reader. Okay, this story is science fiction. Please remember, this is a science fiction, and this is about a very talented scientist, a genius scientist, who is Mr. Griffin. And he wanted to make human beings invisible. And accordingly, he started doing a lot of experiments, and finally he succeeded in finding out a rare drugs on consuming which he finally made himself invisible. But he made a mistake. What is the mistake? The mistake is that he should have also, invented an alternative drugs, which can make himself again visible on consuming it, without inventing an alternative drugs like vaccine. Okay, he consumed the drugs which made himself invisible. As a result, he, got into a great trouble. So this is the story, main story of this story, of this lesson. Now let me just go part by part of these relations. The first part of the story begins with two boys. The two boys in London were very much confused to see suddenly, the impression of human feet on a muddy street. Okay, so they were confused because why? Because without seeing any human being, they got to see moving impression of human feet. So that made them very much, bewildered and very much confused and frightened. Anyway, they started tracing the moving footprints, and finally the footprints get fainter and fainter and finally disappeared. Now the question is, from where these footprints from an invisible man came? These two boys did not know. But we people who are the reader of the story know that these are the footmarks of the scientist Mr. Griffin. Okay, now let me tell you. So how this Mr. Griffin made himself invisible, and how this Mr. Griffin had to roam around in the streets of London, invisible. Yes, the thing is that he had to run, away from the landlord. Why? Because he set the house of the landlord on fire out of anger. And the question is, why did he get angry with the landlord? Yes, the landlord asked him to get out from his room, to get out from his rented house. The question is, why did the landlord ask him to get out from the room? Yes, he did not pay the rental time. Okay, he did not pay the rental in time. He was irregular. So the landlord was unhappy with him, and you see, just out of anger and frustration, this scientist, Mr. Griffin, did not hesitate to set the house on fire. From this behavior, you can imagine what kind of man, man this Griffin was. He might be a very talented scientist, but he was not a good human being. The society is not going to get any benefit from this kind of crazy, mad, eccentric, scientist. Okay. Now, after this, the scientist, Mr. Griffin, started roaming here and there in the big London city, in the city of big London, and finally he decided to he decided to sleep into a big London store.